some highlights there. 48,000 call family forestry, forest ownerships that we work with. That's quite a few folks that out there, and they just want to do what's right for their forested lands and their woodlands and windbreaks and shelter belts and agroforestry operations, and that's who we're here to serve in a big way. The Tree City USA program is a nationwide program, but Kansas does actually have one of the highest number of active Tree City USA sites, over 90 here in Kansas, of sites that have dedicated to a management plan, an inventory, and a financial investment in their urban and community forest resources. We have 240 plus what it said red card firefighters there. And what that refers to is those who have obtained the National Wildland Fire Coordinating Group standards for fighting fires across the whole country. We have, like it says there, over 13,000 volunteer firefighters, 16,000 total firefighters that do great work, and these 240 are those that have just kind of taken an additional step that the Forest Service does provide that service to get that national credentialing, and we're happy to do that. And in the where it says in the industry, 63 primary processors, that's both mills that are milling that into a secondary product, and also those that are basically exporting entire logs. There's a fair amount, especially our walnut log resource, that is just exported as a whole log. And that's where that number comes in. And it's a bigger number than a lot of people think it is sometimes, of how many entities and small businesses there are directly involved in the timber industry, if you will. And the last thing, we were requested to touch on our budget, and this is a pie chart of that from the fiscal year of 20, both state and federal fiscal years kind of combined, because we do work in both realms quite a bit. The green and the gray, that 41% is kind of our base operational funding from the U.S. Forest Service. And that comes to us in those 6 program areas, basically, where they have certain pieces of that they want to see spent in those different areas when they give us what's called the Consolidated Payment Grant, which is still technically a grant, but it is not a competitive, we have to apply for it every year. Every year it just comes to us as part of our agreement to work with the U.S. Forest Service on providing state and private forestry services. On the 17% you see there, that number goes up and down each year based on, because it is competitive. It's us competing with other states for that federal money primarily. Sometimes there is an occasional state fund that comes in there, but that's also primarily federal money, where we are applying to say we have a specific project that we will do really beneficial work with that fund, and we then compete with other states who also think they have a really good use for those funds as well. And we've been very, very successful in obtaining those funds for here in Kansas over the years. The 15%, the yellow shade, if you will, that's the money brought in from our tree sales program. We also have an agreement with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, where when we provide a plan or services towards their program areas for their producers, they pay us what's called a technical service provider fee for that service. So that's the 2 main areas of that 15% of fund generation there you see. So kind of add all that up, that's 73% of our funds that come from some other source other than state funds. And then we have the 16%, which we were very fortunate to get just a couple of years ago to provide increased wildland fire suppression capabilities. And we're pleased that has been the case, and hopefully we're doing good work, that the legislature's pleased with that. That 11%, that actually comes to us not through any sort of natural resources or land management type of funding, but through higher education, through ESARC. And then the university understands that while those are kind of higher education extension type funds, that they have the responsibility to support us as an entity within their structure. And so they do that through that allocation of, it's upper 300s, lower 400s every year, depending on what their budget is. I mean, what they can afford. They have to cut off a piece of what they're given to give us that. And again, that's that. I mentioned the staff breakdown, where there's a kind of administrative support across the whole agency, and that's where we keep those funds, those state funds, is where they are impacting all program areas across the full agency, as well as just operating funds such as utility bills and things like that. So at that point, I will turn over the speaking part to Robert Atchison, our Rural Forestry Coordinator. And Robert, just let me know when you'd like me to advance slides.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Our rural forestry program provides direct one-on-one service through 8 district foresters located throughout the state. Many of those foresters are located in our CS offices. In the program, we also have 2 water quality foresters, one of which offices with Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Conservation. And we have an outreach coordinator. Our foresters provide woodland and windbreak management recommendations, and healthy, productive woodlands are really one of the greatest water quality contributions that we offer to the state. We also assist landowners with tree and nut planting to establish windbreaks and woodlands and riparian forest buffers. The buffer photo that you see in this slide is located on the Delaware River above Lake Perry. Foresters also provide insect and disease diagnosis and control recommendations and assist landowners with timber harvest. Next slide, please, Jason. Sustaining water quality and quantity is one of the top 7 issues that we have identified in our Kansas Forest Action Plan. Our I'm sorry. That is one of the issues, but what I wanted to talk about on this slide was that a really important role that our foresters play is the provision of financial assistance to landowners to help cover the costs of forestry projects like tree planting and forest and improvement through USDA conservation programs like EQIP. This service includes preparing forest management plans, project plans, and certifying that they're done correctly. We accomplish this with a contribution agreement within our CS. Another cost share program we provide technical service for is the Riparian Quality Enhancement Initiative with the Division of Conservation. We also provide an outreach and education program through K-State publications and through forestry field days, working with a variety of partnerships like the Kansas Forestry Association. Next slide, please, Jason. This slide shows our main water partners, which are highlighted in yellow. Note that this does not include water plan funding. We have no state or financial support for forestry with water. It's all federal dollars. Our main source of funding is through USDA Forest Service landscape scale restoration grants. Since 2008, they've funded over $2.6 million for our work in water. We also received a $13 million RCPP grant, but only about $2.3 million of that grant came to the Kansas Forest Service for technical assistance, which allowed us to hire our water quality foresters. The rest went to the EQIP program and to NRCS for administration. That grant will end in April. Kansas Department of Health and Environment's Watershed Management Section, RAPS, and Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Conservation have been critical partners for us in our work with water. Next slide, please, Jason. Sustaining water quality and quantity is one of the 7 top issues that we've identified in our Kansas Forest Action Plan. Our legislative mandate specifically assigns Kansas Forest Service the responsibility of managing our forests because of the water quality and stream bank stabilization benefits that they provide. The 2 main water issues that we focus on are sedimentation of federal reservoirs by encouraging the protection management and establishment of riparian forests and priority watersheds, and controlling invasive phreatophytes like tamarisk and Russian olive in the Rattlesnake Creek watershed. Next slide, please, Jason. This slide gives you an idea of the loss of stream bank on the Little Blue River above Tuttle Creek Reservoir over a 23-year period. We don't know exactly how much of the 8 acres of sediment ended up in the reservoir, but we do know that Tuttle Creek Reservoir has lost about 45% of its water holding capacity due to sedimentation, and that most of it's coming from stream banks. Next slide, please. One of the other services that we offer in our agency is the assessment of riparian forest condition in priority watersheds. Hopefully you received an example of our Twin Lakes watershed riparian forest assessment. Our assessments classify riparian forests into 3 categories. Red areas you see on this map are in need of establishment or tree planting. Areas that need additional management are highlighted in yellow on this map, and then riparian forests that we believe should be protected are what you see in green. These assessments have guided our relatively unsuccessful targeted outreach that we've tried to use to engage private landowners. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. Note the photos also in this slide to the right-hand side, at least my right-hand side as I see it. They give you an idea of what this classification scheme looks like on the ground in those photos. Next slide, please. The Interagency Stream Bank Protection Team includes Kansas Department of Health and Environment's Watershed Management Section, the Kansas Water Office, and Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Conservation. Kansas Forest Service partners with this team, providing responsibility for successful establishment of forest buffers adjacent to bank stabilization projects. Specifically, the Division of Conservation sends pass-through money to the Kansas Forest Service, who is then responsible for designing buffers and setting up and managing contracts with tree planting vendors. We don't receive any direct funding to do this work, but we rely on our federal sources. This slide shows a typical project. The bank is often sloped to a 3-to-1 grade. Rock weirs are installed to deflect erosion currents from the bank. And then trees or nuts are planted into a cover crop. These sites are generally monitored for like a 3 to 5 year period. Since 2011, 109 buffers have been planted through this team's work on over 14 miles of stream banks, preventing an estimated 214,019 cubic yards of sediment from entering the river. Again, we're not sure how much of that ends up in the reservoir, so our estimates may be high. However, if you look at the total project cost of $85 a lineal foot, we're looking at about a $6.6 million investment in the work we've done. If you compare that cost to dredging reservoirs at $6.67 a cubic foot, or excuse me, a cubic yard, you're looking at a cost of about $1.4 million annually, or $14 million over this 10-year period. Next slide, please. This is just another example of our stream bank protection team projects. This one is on the Little Blue River in Washington County. Notice that we have some pretty good growth on this forest buffer after 2 years. Sycamore is often a popular choice for these plantings because of its fast growth. But we also often use oak and walnut when we can to increase the value of these plantings to the landowners. Next slide, please. This slide shows some of the work that we accomplish in the upper reaches watersheds, or what we describe as stream orders 1, 2, or 3. In addition to the high cost of designing bank stabilization projects, the other significant cost is the rock that is necessary to create the weirs or serve as a hard toe at the base of the stream bank. So if we can use existing material on site, such as trees, we can make these projects much cheaper, which is one of the single greatest barriers we have to this work, the cost of these projects to our landowners. Next slide, please. This slide shows how the trees are then laid into the channel at the base of the stream bank, with the roots facing into the stream at an angle that is against the direction of stream flow. Sod and then soil backfill is placed over the top of the trees, and sometimes we'll use geotextile products to help lock everything in. Next slide, please, Jason. This is what this particular project looked like a year following this construction. You can see in the protruding root wads in one of the slide photos. Next slide, please. This is the design of the project, which may be a little bit hard to read. But one thing you might be able to see in this design is that didn't show in the photos is a footer log at the toe of the bank, which is located immediately beneath the root wads. Next slide, please. In addition to sedimentation of federal reservoirs, Kansas Forest Service also works with a variety of partners to remove invasive phreatophytes with a focus on tamarisk and Russian olive in the Rattlesnake Creek watershed. Through a couple of USDA Forest Service grants, we pass money through to the Kansas Grazing Lands Coalition, who writes checks to landowners that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has prepared plans for to remove tamarisk and Russian olive. Our funding combines with North American Wetland Conservation Act grants. NACA is the acronym, you may have heard those referred to. And a host of partners work with us to get a tremendous amount of work done on the ground in that area. Since 2017, we've restored over 40 miles of stream bank, or at least riparian areas is maybe a better way to say that, and removed 8,348 acres of tamarisk, Russian olive, and some other invading species. Next slide, please. Because we have such difficulty engaging landowners in the management and establishment of riparian forests, in 2017, through another grant from the USDA Forest Service, we hired an outreach coordinator to create a water quality advocate network. The concept behind the network was to use a peer-to-peer outreach approach. The project has trained landowners who have implemented best management practices for water quality and also other conservationists to promote the adoption of riparian forest buffers and other practices. It's also trained about 83 natural resource professionals to use social marketing strategies developed from the Yale School of Forestry. This slide shows the advocates we've trained so far and their location in relation to priority watersheds. We have about 19 advocates currently working in the network. Next slide, please. This slide shows some of the deliverables associated with the outreach grants, such as training our foresters and natural resource professionals in social marketing, creating profiles of our landowners so we know how to connect with them, and then the different roles of this outreach coordinator. This pretty much ends our presentation, and we're grateful for the opportunity to share this work with you. And of course, now glad to hear any questions or comments that you might have for us.
Thank you, and thank you for that. And Jason, did you not mention another individual, Andrew Klein, in the beginning?
No, Mr. Chairman, we just have 2 additional staff that are here available for questions. They weren't going to present.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, committee. Questions? I'll begin with one question. Mr. Atchison, you mentioned the water quality and quantity as one of the top 7 priorities. What are maybe a couple of the others priorities so we can kind of get an idea of how important this is to you?
Sure. Our Kansas Forest Action Plan addresses seven big issues in addition to water quality and quantity. Forest health is one. Wildfire risk is another critical one for us. Loss of forest land, protecting and restoring biodiversity, sustaining and protecting agroforestry ecosystems, which is our windbreaks and our riparian forests, and then maintaining the economic benefits of our woodlands. Those are the 7 issues that have been identified through our strategic planning with a lot of input from partners and the public in coming up with those issues.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, if I remember right, a couple years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I can't remember now, we passed a compact for fighting fires. Is that in effect, and is it working for you?
Yes, we did. In 2017, joined what's called the Great Plains Wildfire Compact. And that has been utilized multiple times, both us going to support other states and states coming to support here in Kansas. And it's a very helpful tool to have available to, when one state just has more need than they have capacity, they can reach out to their neighbors in a, just helping across the state line, handshake kind of way. And it's working well. Yes.
Good. Thank you for that. Representative Stodgdale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just curious, maybe this is coming from an urban area, but you talked about planting nut trees. Do nut trees provide a viable agricultural product in Kansas?
Robert, you want to take that?
Yeah, if that's okay with you, Jason.
Yes, please.
First of all, my reference to planting nuts was to another way that we establish trees. We establish forests and woodlands through either planting seedlings or also using what we call direct seeding, which is planting the nuts of the trees. But your question is asking the role of kind of the economic side of things. We definitely support the production of pecan, especially in the southeast part of the state, and also encourage growing black walnut for those purposes too. And a lot of the nuts collected, a lot of the black walnuts collected end up going over into Missouri where they're processed for nut meats. But what surprises a lot of people, I think, in Kansas is that we do have a fairly significant forest industry for a prairie state. And we have recently had an economic impact analysis that has been done for us using 2019 data from U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of Agriculture, which suggests that we contribute in the neighborhood of $2.3 billion in forest products on an annual basis. Now, that's a very broad analysis. You can, when you narrow that analysis and you just include our mills and our sawmills and our loggers, you're looking more like 63 million. But the point is that we have a forest industry in the state which provides economic benefits to the people.
Great, thank you. Very interesting presentation this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Representative Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will second the motion. Extremely interesting presentation. As a member of an urban area homeowners association that's responsible for, I don't remember how many acres of common area and a lot of trees, I would like to thank the Forest Service for their program of providing inexpensive young trees and advice and equipment, rabbit tubes, stakes, etc., for that sort of project. We had a 3-year tree planting process. We kind of focused on the bird-friendly packages, which have done well, and shrubs, and it has added a lot to our common area. Unfortunately, we also had a committee that went to the Extension Service and was trained on how to establish riparian areas around the 2 lakes that we are responsible for. And that was established, followed the training that we had, and then there were so many vociferous complaints to the board of the Homeowners Association that it was mowed down. So we have more work to do. I think the public education of the benefits of riparian areas, but not only to reduce sedimentation, which we struggle with greatly with our lakes, but also the runoff from lawns and so forth. Our common area is not maintained like a golf course. It has a lot of buffalo grass and other areas that is not, it's not irrigated, it's not fertilized. We try to prevent the unfortunate runoff in that regard, but we know that a lot of it does come from yards and does therefore go into the lakes, which then goes into, I think it feeds the, I can't remember what, what stream that goes through Wichita, just a little bit west of us, that it feeds into, which then goes into the Arkansas River. So I want to thank you for that program, and we will keep at it. I think we can make another run at it, and the more we can educate the public on the benefits of having grasses and so forth grown along the edges of both drainage areas and the lakes that many homeowners associations have, the better off we'll be, and I believe it will be successful eventually. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Representative Vaughn.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Atchison and Mr. Hartman, for your presentation. We've heard a lot about stream bank stabilization, so it's interesting to see how that process actually works. My question was about the stream bank stabilization. You'd mentioned that you'd done about 77,000 lineal feet of stabilization since 2011. I was wondering how many additional feet of priority area you're looking at stabilizing going forward, potentially, and then about how many projects are you able to average in a given year?
Thanks for that question, Representative Vaughn. I would ask probably either Andrew Klein or Jaron Tyndall to be the best to take that question.
Thank you, Representative Vaughn. With the state of Kansas Interagency Stream Bank Protection Team, those accomplishments represent just kind of a rough educated guess here, about a third of the need out there. So the Kansas Water Office maintains the priority hotspot list, they call it. And a hotspot is all these very actively eroding sites above the priority federal reservoirs that they've identified as potential candidates for work. And so, yeah, about 1/3 of the work has been accomplished, and Kansas Water Office can provide kind of the current priority list and could show how much actual need there is yet. In a typical year, approximately 10 projects are done, and that's all contingent on funding that comes from state sources, state water plan, but also if they're able to tap into any federal money from EPA, for example. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Mr. Klein, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Representative Newland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My network connection is going in and out, so I hope I'm not repeating anything. But in the presentation, I heard that sometimes there's a problem.
Yeah, you broke off. We'll come back to Joe a little later if we can. Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
Also, my rural network out here is not very strong. My question had to do with, I heard the information about the Russian olive and other trees along the banks. I'd like a little bit more in depth about that because I've seen some Russian olive trees along our banks along here. What is their problem, and what is some of the other trees? Can you drill into that a little more? Thank you.
Yeah, Robert, please.
So the issue with Russian olive and the issue with salt cedar, or tamarisk is another name for it, is that they're phreatophytes, which means that they have, especially tamarisk, they have deep roots that go down to the water table, which is one reason tamarisk has taken over so much of the Arkansas River corridor, is because as our water table has dropped, the other native vegetation that existed there prior in, for example, cottonwoods and such, have died. And so their ability to have extremely deep root systems that go down to that water table enables them to survive. This is unfortunate from the standpoint that these are not native plants, and they are also plants that draw salt from the soil and can create some soil health issues from that standpoint. They're very invasive. They displace native vegetation and range in those areas. And so from a landowner perspective, from a producer agricultural perspective, they're generally plants that are not very helpful. I'm glad to answer any other questions you might have specifically.
One more question on follow up on that, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So does that include the red cedar that we're having out here in our rural areas?
Some of the work that we're doing in the Rattlesnake Creek watershed, because we have so many partners involved, it does include eastern red cedar in removing that from our grassland areas. We support the use of eastern red cedar is a native, our only native evergreen that we have in Kansas. And we support its use in appropriate areas associated with windbreaks in the western part of our state. And but as we all know, it's a huge invasive issue for our grasslands, and we do not support it's spread into our grasslands.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Very good presentation.
I'll second that. Representative Haswood, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for the presentation today, presenters. My question is, you listed the top 7 issues with the Kansas Forest Service plan. Is there any of these that change within the last year, or you see something that you anticipate in the future become more, prevalent?
That's a very good question. The process we go through, that forest action plan for setting those priorities, is reviewed actually every 5 years. And a fuller review, a larger scale review every 10. So since our last plan, they have stayed fairly consistent. There hasn't been a lot of change. There's been small tweaks, if you will, but the overarching larger issues we're facing have stayed consistent, and we kind of vision that staying for the next review probably as well, because those are just the major issues facing not only forestry, but a lot of natural resource issues in our state. The fragmentation, the invasive species, those are some of the wildland fire. Those are just some of the issues that are just out there in a large way that they're going to take a lot of time and resources to deal with. So if Robert has anything to add, but that's what I would say.
I guess my hope would be that as we look toward the future, that we would be more and more involved in the water quality and quantity issue and trying to sustain, water in our federal reservoirs and using, those upland areas as a way to try to solve part of that problem. By restoring those areas to the best of our ability. We've been working quite a bit in the or trying to focus in the upper watersheds with some of our future emphasis. So we'll see how that pans out.
Thank you.
Representative Stockstill, do you have another question? Does not. Well, we'll second all of the comments made so far. A very, very informative presentation from Jason, Robert, and Andrew. We appreciate it very much. Thank you again, and you have a great day. Committee, I want you all to unmute. We have one thing to do, and that's to approve minutes. The minutes are from January the 25th, 26th, 27th, and 28th. They were sent to you. Do I have a motion? It's been moved that we approve the minutes by Representative Russ Jennings. Do I have a second?
Michael Murphy, I'll second.
Okay, we've got seconds. Although, any discussion, any correction to the minutes? Seeing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those against say no. The minutes have been approved. Thank you very much. Tomorrow, we have the Kansas Water Office coming back in, so I look forward to that. We are adjourned. Thank you all.